Good day, everyone. For today's discussion, we're going to have an introduction to contemporary literature, focusing on stories, poetry, and drama. And here are the objectives. At the end of the lesson, students should be able to be acquainted with styles and concerns of contemporary stories, examine theatrical structures of contemporary drama, analyze elements of contemporary poetry, trace the history, characteristics, and famous personality in contemporary poetry, and trace the changes and development of contemporary drama. But before we proceed to our discussion, let us first play a minigame. It's entitled Guess the Word. So this game is just very simple. Descriptions will be given in the following slides, and all that you just have to do is guess the mystery word. So you'll only be given 10 seconds to guess each of the missing letters, and I guess everyone's now ready. So let's begin. Number 1. It is a type of literature based on the interplay of words and rhythm. Timer starts now. Time's up. The answer is poetry. Number 2. It is the basic beat in the line of a poem. Timer starts now. Time's up. The answer is rhythm. Number 3. It is a Japanese 3-line poetic form, usually about nature. Timer starts now. Time's up. The answer is haiku. Number 4. It is a stanza made up of 4 lines, often containing a rhyme scheme. Timer starts now. Time's up. The answer is quatrain. Number 5. It is a humorous rhyming poem written in 5 lines and having a particular meter. Timer starts now. Time's up. The answer is limerick. Number 6. It is a poem that is 14 lines long, generally written in iambic pentameter. Timer starts now. Time's up. The answer is sonnet. Number 7. It is a poem that does not follow a predictable form or rhyme scheme or metric pattern. Timer starts now. Time's up. The answer is free verse. Next, it is the form of ominous hints or symbolic incidents or conditions the audience expects certain logical developments. Timer starts now. Time's up. The answer is foreshadowing. And for the last one, it pertains to each of the word uttered by the characters that provide substance to the play. Timer starts now. Time's up. The answer is dialogue. So those words that you just have guessed have something to do with our lesson for today, which is about contemporary literature, which includes all the literary manifestations that have taken place since postmodernity. It is defined by a period but also by its very particular style. Most academics call contemporary literature all literary production after the Second World War in the 1940s. So this period extends to the present. Contemporary literature is characterized by fragmentation, unreliable narrators, imitation of styles and authors, changing narration, nonlinear presentation and play, and uncertainty in language. Now let's talk about the Spanish Enrique Villamatas, representative of contemporary literature. In the same way, this literature is recognized by the historically postmodern content, and this is related to the era of computers, robotics, mobile phones, and globalization, among others. Now, some work or some writer could be considered contemporary if it shares stylistic, artistic, or thematic qualities of the present. Under this concept, even some writers of other centuries seem contemporary. Much of contemporary literature comes from Western authors. However, the term is not exclusive to European or American literatures. In fact, globalization has allowed us to appreciate contemporary works written by many literary figures in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. In addition to novels and poetry, this literary style covers a wide variety of genres, such as traditional fiction and other forms adapted to the new reality or graphic novel or blog literature. Now let's talk about the origin of contemporary literature. So let's start from 1940 to 1990. In the course of this half century, mankind witnessed numerous changes. The end of World War II, or the fall of communism in Europe, and the end of Cold War marked the beginning of a new society. In addition, technical innovations emerged, such as cell phones and internet, color televisions, and digital discs. It was also the era of new music like hip hop and the acceptance of new cultures. And within this whole wave of changes, literature was enriched with new genres. Many of these were a response to technological changes and the new social reality. And a feature of contemporary literature of this time was that many stories were based on reality and had a credible plot. During the first 2 decades, contemporary literature shared spaces with modernism, retaining certain features such as, for example, focusing on the characters rather than the plot. And in its later development until the 1990s, the contemporary changed to the description of hard realities. Likewise, it focused on its attention to the exposure of psychological problems such as exclusion and loneliness. Now let's proceed to the period from 1990 to the present. So the period from 1990 to the year 2000 was characterized by globalization, growing concern about global warming, and war against Islamic terrorism. In addition, it is a decade marked by wars, natural disasters, and a growing population. The biggest economic crisis also occurred since the Great Depression, the 2008 recession, and many people lost their jobs. Thus, contemporary literature received all these influences and was nourished by all these new contexts. In response to the communicational needs of society, new genres appeared. So, the new fantasy novels and the return to the metric and the rhyme in poetry are the indicative of this new time. Now let's talk about the characteristics of contemporary literature. First, we have the personal point of view. The works of literature reflects the social and political views of the authors. These are shown through the characters, the connections with the events, and the socioeconomic messages of their works. Next, we have the innovative narrative resources. So there is a break with the previous narrative techniques, meaning the contemporary literature uses avant-garde narrative resources such as the modification of time and the presentation of the inner world of the characters. Next, we have magical realism. The development of magical realism as a narrative technique represents a breakthrough in the 20th century contemporary literature. This revolutionary technique is marked by a deep social and political character. Next, we have the pressing issues. Most of the themes of contemporary literature are related to the overwhelming problems of the world now, such as globalization, race and gender, inequality, climate and environment, and wars and terrorism. Likewise, in this extensive list, you can find other topics such as politics and economics, ethics and morals, mass culture and media, and international crime and others. Next, influence of World War II. The works of contemporary literature tend to be influenced by the prosperous lifestyle that followed World War II. This literary style has its roots in the devastation that war brought to the world. And lastly, we have the fiction and non-fiction superimposed. In contemporary literature, the distinction between fiction and non-fiction can be blurred. This is known as crosses. Fiction writers base stories on real-life events and may even include authentic material. On the other hand, non-fiction writers make historical figures come alive by incorporating dialogues and imaginary scenes. Now let's talk about the genres of contemporary literature. First, we have classic fiction genre. This genre is made up of stories, novels, plays, poems, and films. Here, everything is imaginary and invented, but it is presented as a mirror that reflects life and human experience in a concrete or abstract way. Now, the first way to distinguish contemporary fiction is that it will have universal truths and emotions that every human being can experience. In some way, it gives expression to emotions. Similarly, fiction in contemporary literature is realistic, which means that it has the following characteristics. It contains characters that behave in the way that most readers would. The characters must be credible. The story is set in the present. The environment is a real place, or at least it seems a real place. Events are events that could happen in real life. And lastly, dialogue is informal or conversational and often includes regional dialects. Next, we have literature of ghostwriters. A surprising number of successful books are written by ghostwriters, but there are also ghost novels. By definition, these authors have no names, and only their peers and the publishers who depend on them know them. Next, we have graphic novels. So the graphic novel is usually interpreted as a cartoon with a long narrative for a mature audience, published in hardcover or rustic and sold in bookstores with serious literary themes and sophisticated work of art. Next, we have literature for children. The last 20 years have seen a flowering of writing for children. Among the top representatives of this literature are C.S. Lewis, the writer of Chronicles of Narnia, and J.K. Rowling, the author of the very famous novel Harry Potter. So under the literature for children, we have the science fiction and blog literature. For science fiction, it is a very popular branch in contemporary literature. This is intertwined with the technological progress of the world. However, literary works of science fiction do not necessarily imply a solid, specific, or scientific basis. A writer can create a science fiction literary work to express an alternative point of view or concept. And for the blog literature, it is an online magazine or individual or joint authorship. And this blogs have become a new means to create literary works. And there are even cases in which this creations have become books. Now let's talk about the importance of contemporary literature. The word contemporary is very crucial in modern day world. This implies the belongingness of the equal time. When people say they are contemporary, this signifies that they belong to the same time frame. Reading contemporary literature is really amazing life experience because as a reader, one comes to know what his or her contemporary people are viewing the world. And the contemporary writing reflects what others are thinking. When we read contemporary literature, we get into familiarity of the other people's reactions to the present day world and the course of life. And great men say contemporary literature is the history of the present, meaning readers have the access to the yellow page history book in library. History is written records of past, and we have easy access to pass through history books. But contemporary literature creates the right passage to present history, which is still in making. And contemporary literature also benefits the readers in many ways. Maybe by reading contemporary literature, one will be able to smell the present day history, which is going through the periods of pains of its making. So contemporary literature began in the 1940s or so, and here are just a few of its qualities. So these are reality-based stories with strong characters and a believable story. They have well-defined, realistic, highly developed characters in realistic, sometimes harsh environments, and often the stories are character-driven. And the literature is ironic and reflects current political, social, and personal issues. In addition, contemporary literature may reflect a personal cynicism, disillusionment, and frustration. Facts are questioned as are historical perspectives, often presents two contradictory arguments, and the literature may reflect a growing skepticism in the existence of God, as well as distrust or lack of faith in traditional institutions. Contemporary short story. Like a novel, the modern short story always shows us something of how people respond to life. The method of the short story is inevitably more limited than that of a novel. A novel tries to create a world, its own reality, within which its characters developed. In some novels, we are apparently shown the whole life of a character, as it is impossible to write about every second of that character's existence. The novelist presents the whole life in a series of moments, key incidents that create a strong sense of the kind of persons he or she was invented. In the short story, however, we may catch only a glimpse of individuals, either through a dramatic incident, or by showing them in an everyday situation, or by showing fleeting moments from their lives from which the reader may gain some, but not an entire impression of characters. While we may feel that we really know the characters in a novel and may respond to them as to people in real life, it is really possible to feel the same for a character in short story. Characters in the short story are closer to those people in real life with which we have fleeting contact, like change meetings or holiday acquaintances. We share time with them but know little about them, of their past, or of what they are really like, and then perhaps lose contact. All that remains in a brief impression based on a few shared moments. Much of the appeal of the short story lies in this incompleteness. It raises questions, doubts, and ambiguities. The incompleteness is rather like that of something that is not resolved. More is suggested in a short story than it ever tells us. Our imagination is always creatively engaged. Usually, the short story raises more questions than it answers. It arouses our curiosity. Why do certain characters behave as they do? What will they do next? Just as poetry often seeks to communicate feelings or emotions which is often difficult, perhaps impossible, to put into words, so the incompleteness is the story can hint at states of mind or feeling common to us all, but difficult to bring out with clarity. Like a poem, a short story can rely on a kind of suggestiveness. For example, where it tries to evoke a mood rather than showing it. It certainly shares some qualities with poetry. The short story is often based around a single key moment or incident in the life of the characters. At times, it represents a turning point in a character's life. It can be a moment that actually triggers tension or conflict between two individuals or an individual and society. It may be less the moment itself than the character's response to it. In such cases, the key moment might already have occurred or been reported. Some moments can be trivial and ordinary, and others may seem dramatic and quite out of ordinary. And the short story can show change in the main character. While still lacking the space for the full psychological development of the character, this kind of story might look at a period in the character's life rather than at a specific isolated moment. And here are the features of good short story. Number 1. A good short story reflects life and does not contain black and white characters. Number 2. Themes could be topical or universal. Topical themes have a sense of immediacy and particularity. They would be pertinent to a particular place and time. And topical themes evoke greater interest and has immediate and contemporary relevance. Number 3. On the other hand, there are problems, conflicts, and experiences that man has always faced and would continue to face irrespective of time and place. Such things are as, for instance, birth and death, love and hate, good and evil, grief, pain and suffering. And number 4, they are of universal significance. Such themes have greater depth and endurance. It is said that great stories like symphonies contain more than one theme. Thematically topical subjects may be or may well become the rags of time. And that's all for the first part of our discussion. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned a lot.